Okay, so we're back with financial videos. We're back with Tesla. We have a huge update about the Q3 financials coming out today at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And the conference call is going to be at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We have major updates, including a very interesting interview by Cathie Wood. So Cathie Wood went on CNBC and she was asked, is Elon super focused on Tesla now that, the new CEO of Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, currently known as X, is kind of more in the ropes of things? And she basically answered a whole different question. She said that Elon is almost done with FSD. Essentially, Tesla is almost done with FSD. She was talking about how Elon is still very much involved with X, given the kinks he still has to work out there, but how he's also very focused on Tesla because, and then she dropped the bomb, she said that he's almost done with FSD. He's at the finish line of FSD, and that's great news. For the people who've been following Tesla for the past few years, it's not a huge surprise, and we can see that they're almost there, and it's kind of insane to think about how nobody in the industry even comes close. Name me who's number two. Who's number two in this? Now, just to kind of mention a few things, we're talking about not just an 80% gross margin business or business line. We're talking about a potential industry standard, much like it happened with the supercharger network. Once it becomes an industry standard and Tesla becomes the provider of pretty much a monopoly or a quasi-monopoly of full self-driving, we're talking about a whole different enchilada. It's not just selling cars, but we all knew that. But first of all, we do have to talk about the earnings. Here are my expectations. This is what I see happening. So again, the conference call is going to be 5:30, and I do recommend you listen to the conference call because I think the more important stuff are going to come in through the conference call, not specifically from the papers we're going to get at the Q3 financials, because that's pretty much already everybody understands where this thing is headed. Now look, first of all, I foresee a $24 billion quarter. Now, $20 billion from automotive, $2 billion from energy, $2 billion from services. That's an increase from $21.5 billion year over year. Now, there will be margin erosion. There's no doubt in my mind. You cannot avoid margin erosion if you're dropping prices on your base models and also the extended models. But that's a whole different game, right? So if price cuts are part of the game, you're going to see margin erosion. But at the same time, you're going to see increased sales. So that's why revenues will go up from 21 to 21.5 to 24. But margins will eventually, they'll have to come down. So I foresee a 20% gross margin for Tesla. X credits, it's probably going to be between 17 and 17.5. But that's a huge decline from the 28% we had just a year ago. But that isn't going to do anything to the stock price because that is already baked in. Everybody understands where this is coming from, especially given the fact that revenues, automotive revenues, will go up from 18.6 to $20 billion, it seems like, in this quarter. So even though the gross margin will shrink towards the 20% from 28%, which is a huge decline when you just look at it this way, but revenues, automotive revenues, will climb from 18.6 to $20 billion. That is the whole concept of what they're doing here. You drop the price, you sell more, you make more money, even though you make less on every single item. That's just kind of the smart way to squeeze out your competition because they are actually selling cars at a loss. Every single one of them, with the exception of perhaps BYD. But BYD has a whole different problem to deal with China and a whole bunch of other stuff, etc., etc. No full self-driving. They have other challenges in which they will not be able to compete with Tesla, at least in the near future, it seems like. I also have predictions about the operating margin. I think the biggest hit will come from the operating margin. I think that will be slashed significantly below 10%. Probably in that region between 9 and 10%. That's a huge slash. But again, I don't think it's going to negatively impact the share price because at the end of the day, if the EBITDA numbers, the earnings before the tax, the interest and all that stuff, and depreciation, if the EBITDA numbers does not go below $4.5 billion, if it stays in that range of $5 billion to $4.5 billion, that means that the EBITDA only drops 10% on what seems like a significant, massive drop of operating margins. And that will be the crux of it. Can they stay above $4.5 billion of EBITDA? Now, currently, the expected numbers are EPS of 72 to 75 cents, which is where I think they're going to land. They're not going to miss EPS. And the revenues are expected to be 24.2. Again, whether they hit 24.1 or 24.3, it doesn't really matter. That isn't going to move the share price because all of this is baked in. It's well known. It's well documented. You have to remember that this is, the Tesla community has been so accurate with predicting these stuff. This is all well known. So there's no point in looking at these stuff except just to kind of gloss over it. What I think is going to be more critical with this conference call is the stuff they're going to talk about that will move the share price. What will they say about the Cybertruck, specifically the timeline of the Cybertruck? That's super, super critical. Every word they say about that timeline is going to make a huge difference. Again, the same thing with Highland. What's going on with Highland? We've seen it. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. And it's the most beautiful sedan in that price category by far. It's way better looking than the usual Model 3, the current Model 3. So what's going on with the Highland timeline and where we're going to see that? Again, as I mentioned, EBITDA, about $4.5 billion is important, but even more important, will Elon confirm what Cathie Wood said in her video, which is FSD is almost at the finish line? If Elon confirms that, then we're looking at a massive, massive reorganization of the market perception of the stock. It's currently significantly underpriced. I've talked about it many times. This is a $1,400 stock. Make no mistake about it. But that realization moment always comes when everybody's sleeping on it, when everybody's kind of on the wayside saying, the stock is that, this is that. This is a $1,400 stock if you have patience. Of course, it's going to be volatile, and I'm not making any predictions whether the stock is going to come up or down in the next couple of days after the earnings. But this is the stuff I'm looking at. Not specifically the numbers, Cybertruck timeline, FSD timeline, Highland timeline. These three factors are the most critical for the continuation of the good momentum Tesla had. I think it's up, 100% year to date? Well, in any case, that's kind of my 2 cents about it. I try to keep it quick and to the point. I don't want to waste your time. I'll see you right after the earnings.